We've already introduced some pretty common teaching methods we see in college classrooms, namely lecture, discussion, and group work. This week we're going to move past those and recognize other teaching methods that might encourage additional active learning and student engagement, but they might require a bit more effort on behalf of the instructor as well. So I'm calling this Teaching Methods 2.0. And we're going to start with experiential learning, which is one of the most common approaches we see in agricultural type coursework. And it is really connected to that motto of learning by doing. So chapter 16 presents this information, but I admit it doesn't really do a good job of connecting it to the wealth of experiences we provide in the agricultural sciences and natural resources disciplines. So we'll build on that during this presentation. So my objectives are that by the end of this video, you will be able to describe the benefits and challenges of experiential learning and discuss potential experiential learning opportunities in agricultural sciences and natural resources. Finally, you're going to put this into action and apply Kolb's experiential learning cycle to propose a strategy you could use in a college course. So what is experiential learning? Well, it's basically the process of learning through an experience. And not all experiences lead to an educational outcome, but as college instructors, we should be working with that goal in mind. This has been studied for a number of years and in a number of disciplines, and here are some of the prominent researchers we often see cited with this work. I'm going to post a brief video that provides a brief but thorough explanation of this approach's development, and particularly on this model that you see here from Kolb. So we're going to come back and revisit this and apply this today, but I wanted to present it here because this is essentially the experiential learning cycle. So I'd like you to reflect on why we should be using experiential learning in college instruction. And I bet if you reflect on your own experience, you can think of courses that asked you to do more than just read a book and take a test. Maybe you were working in a lab, maybe you got to work with a real client or community partner, perhaps you were doing field-based research. The list goes on. So when you think about those experiences that you've had, what was it that you remember most from that? And perhaps those are the courses where you still use many of those skills you developed. So in the textbook and through other sources, we can recognize that experiential learning has a tremendous transformative educational potential. So it has been found to increase student motivation and engagement, and because students are actually doing something, so they start to get a better appreciation for that subject matter and how it could apply in the real world, quote unquote. It also encourages learning at higher cognitive levels because students are having to actively work to apply theory to real or simulated contexts. Through experiential learning, students can improve their communication, collaboration, and decision-making skills. It also enhances self-awareness and metacognitive skills or metacognition, so they're thinking about what they're thinking. They're processing it through this experiential learning cycle. And finally, it increases retention of that information, improves how students view it as relevant to them, and possibly in how they transfer that to new situations they could encounter. So a lot of powerful, positive comments about experiential learning. In the book, it really only highlights these three types of experiential learning activities. So simulations and games, role-playing, and service learning. And these are all very valuable approaches to use for providing students with experiences. Today, what I want to do is build upon that. You can always reference the book to learn more about those specific approaches. And this service learning is something that I actually do quite a bit. So I'm going to come back to this as an example today. But I want you to consider what other experiential learning activities have you encountered or do you know of in our related disciplines? And if I could hear you talking, you might say some of these sorts of experiences. So when I sat down and thought about things that I know people are doing or that I have done myself in my classroom, these are the sorts of things that come up. So everything from case studies and simulations to my own service learning projects to study abroad or internships to using technology and actually actively experimenting with technology. So there's a lot of things that we're doing in agriculture and related disciplines that weren't mentioned in the book. And so I want us to be able to expand our perspective of what experiential learning looks like. So keep those in mind, and I hope you'll come back to that. What I want to do now is talk about Kolb's experiential learning cycle. And if you are interested in this theory and using this approach in your own college instruction, there are many resources out there for you. But this basic model is a great start to follow when you're designing experiential learning opportunities. And it doesn't necessarily start at one point, but as an instructor, we can step into this cycle by providing a new experience. So the learner will have this concrete experience of trying something new. Then they will reflect upon that experience. And Dewey once said that we don't actually learn from the experience, we learn by reflecting on the experience. And so that is this reflective observation. As an instructor, we probably need to approach this very purposefully. We need to build this in to how we're asking students to consider what they're doing and why it's being done that way. Then there's abstract conceptualization. So based on what learners have developed through their reflections, they start to form new ideas or make connections to what they already knew or add it to their existing knowledge. And then finally, they put that into practice. They actively experiment. So they try again to test if it would hold true in a new situation or under new conditions. So this cycle is ongoing. It never ends. It should be continuing to help our students learn and grow through their experiences. So when you see that list of potential experiential learning opportunities and the cycle, I want you to start to consider what experiential learning activities would work in your discipline. Maybe you're more lab-based, or maybe you're more outside in a demonstration or a field plot. Perhaps you're more in a classroom setting, but you can bring in external sources of information such as clients or community partners. So you're going to put all this together into your first discussion post, and I want you to describe an experiential learning activity you could incorporate in a class you'd like to teach, or maybe you do teach. And I'd like you to provide a summary of what students would do for each of those steps in the experiential learning cycle, so each of those 4 steps. So I've provided an example of what this would look like in my service learning course, in which students work with real partners, real clients, to develop written communication materials. So I've outlined what they are doing at the concrete experience stage and the other stages. So I won't read this to you in the video, but you can pause the video and read this to get a sense. This is what I'm looking for in your response to the discussion topic, because I want you to see what would students be doing in each of these stages, and consider what your role will be in that process. So as an instructor, I hope you'll agree that these experiential learning opportunities can be really valuable, but there's some things we can do to make sure that they're successful. The first thing is you have to make sure it aligns with your learning outcomes, your learning objectives. If it's not clear what the relevance is, students may see it as busy work or pulling their attention away from other things. You need to be clear in your instructions, and if you're going to evaluate that work, you need to provide rubrics. Then you have to design the experience. This might be choosing the appropriate place, working through all the logistics, what other support are students going to need as they're going through that experience. You'll have to explain this all to students. Make sure they understand the purpose, the background, the resources that they need. Allow for mistakes, so create a way for them to fail forward. So in my class, if they're working with the client to do written materials, they turn it into me for review first, so they can make those mistakes and I can help them correct those before they give it to the client, and hopefully they're learning through that process. We have to keep students engaged during the activity, making sure it's hands-on and requires active participation. And then finally, you have to embed some type of reflection. Students need a chance to pause and consider what has been going on, how that is different or similar or supports previous knowledge, and also what they might do with that in the future. You might also have to debrief and help them see some of those bigger picture items that you were hoping they would get out of the experience. Now, all that is well and good, but there are of course some challenges. This is different than some students have ever been, a different approach than students have been exposed to. So they might be a bit resistant to try this new format. It does open up the door to things that are out of their control. So working with the client, they may not call them back. They may not give them all the information they need. They may just be difficult. And when we open up our classroom, we let in those things, but we can also help students recognize that this will happen in their real life, and they'll learn to need to manage that. There's of course logistical issues. I mean, I would love to lead students on a study abroad every semester, but there's not the time or the resources to do so. So considering those off-site constraints and trying to work around those. There's also some assessment difficulties in how you're going to fairly grade or evaluate that work, but through the development of clear rubrics ahead of time, students will better understand your expectations. So in review, experiential learning is a really valuable approach and teaching method in the agricultural discipline. It is basically this combination of doing, reflecting upon it, and then linking that to the learning outcomes. We can use Kolb's experiential learning cycle to develop these learning opportunities and consider what our role will be as an instructor as we facilitate that process. And when we do this well, experiential learning greatly enriches students' understanding and skills.